Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day we try to explore the world of technology in a language that everyone can understand, all washed down with a great human story too. And occasionally we also look under the hood at the tech that makes our digital lives possible. And today I'd like to introduce you to Eric Anderson, who was recently promoted partner at Scale Venture Partners, which is an early stage enterprise tech VC who are early investors in Box, DocuSign, Root Insurance, JFrog, WalkMe, and many, many more. And Eric joined Scale back in 2017 as principal, following leadership roles on AWS and Google Cloud product teams, where he led the team that launched Cloud Data Prep and also played a key role in the launch of Cloud Data Flow too. And not only that, he also moonlights as the host of the Contributor podcast and has deep expertise in things like cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity, app development, and has contributed to the deal teams for Matillion and BigID, and more recently deals like AppOmni, Comet, and Upsolver. But hey, enough scene setting for me. Buckle up and hold on tight, because it's time for me to beam your ears all the way to California, where Eric Anderson is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Eric. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Great. I'm Eric Anderson. I'm a venture capitalist. I work mostly with young startup companies, particularly those that are building tools for software engineers. And I live in California.
Fantastic. And here in 2021, you're working with these young startup companies. But I've got to ask, what's your origin story? Where did your passion for technology come from? And ultimately, what put you on this path you're on today?
Oh, sure. I was an engineer, I guess, by trade. I studied it in school. Computers were always kind of a fun thing to do. But my career took quite a detour. So I ended up in manufacturing. I worked at GE building aircraft engines for a bit out of school, and then ended up in business school, actually, at Harvard Business School. And there that's when I kind of got back to my software roots. I tried to build a startup of my own on the side. I wanted some prize money and built a little Android app. That got me a job at Amazon, which led to a job at Google, and then this one.
Wow, what a cool story. And eventually that path, like you said, led you to Scale Venture Partners, which is an early stage VC investor focused on intelligent business software. But can I ask you set the scene and tell the listeners a little bit more about what you do and what makes you different from all those other VC investors out there?
Sure. I mean, I guess that's a two-part question. You know, what does Scale do and what do I do? So Scale, we focus on folks who are at the cusp of product market fit. They've built something, and they're seeing early evidence that it's working, that customers love it, and they're getting uptake. That's when we want to jump in and fund all the expansion that's going to have to happen in sales, marketing, growth over the next decade towards an IPO. So we look to time our investments right through that transition. We also focus on different sectors. The one I spend my time on, like I said earlier, is open source companies, developer tools, security, kind of the plumbing behind the internet as opposed to the apps necessarily.
And that plumbing behind the internet is something that's often forgotten about, especially in this world where everyone just kind of expects everything to work, but doesn't really look under the hood or take a peek behind the curtain on how it all works. So especially if we look at, let's say, the push from working from home at scale and hybrid working. So with all that in mind, I'm curious, what trends are you seeing in the cloud infrastructure space as a result of all these changes we've seen over the last 18 months?
Well, we're familiar with the collaboration tools that have emerged over the internet. You know, people don't write documents the way they used to. They collaborate over wikis and Google Docs and other tools. And we're seeing the same thing happen with product teams, engineering teams. You know, that they want their own set of collaboration tools and even collaborative environments. And so the work from home, I think engineers kind of led that. The groups of engineers have been working from kind of home and remotely. They were kind of the early adopters, but now it's mainstream, and so all those kind of collaboration efforts are going mainstream as well.
And of course, working from any device in any location at any time is becoming a norm for most people now, and that is our standard expectation. But also that brings additional cybersecurity concerns. So are there any insights that you can share about what you're seeing in that area at the moment? Sure.
Yeah. The way we've dealt with security of infrastructure, the plumbing, who has access to the plumbing, the servers, the databases, has historically been you just give a few important engineers the keys to the kingdom and trust that they will be good citizens. And if you need, if somebody else needs access, they request it or ask nicely and they're given temporary access, but often that access isn't revoked. So it's a bit of a trust kind of honor system historically. And there's some great, upstarts that are giving better systems, better tools where I can say, I need to access this database to help a customer for support reasons for the next 30 minutes. And that gets approved by somebody. And then my activity gets logged while I'm accessing the database. So if there's any concerns about what was accessed, we have a history of it. And then it's automatically revoked. And there's a record of who did what when. This was maybe an aspirational thing, and now it's being codified into the frameworks and regulations people are seeking. Like if you want to be, get a stamp of security approval that you're SOC 2 certified, you're going to have to set up a system like this. And so there's a bunch of cool new companies offering just that setup.
And of course, another big change we've seen over the last 18 months or so is those key applications. If they only work in an office, that's of little use to everyone now. It needs to be available on every single device, whether it be a tablet, smartphone, laptop, and any network too. So in regards to app development, are you seeing a renewed interest in that area and a move away from app fatigue?
Apps for most people are the things we have on our mobile phone, right? That we get from the App Store. But websites are getting increasingly complex, and people are calling them web apps. And now there's tools where you can kind of build one thing and have it deployed to the web or to the desktop or to an app store on a mobile phone. And I think that is addressing a bit of the app fatigue because now web developers can come to the party and use a common set of tools to build once and deploy everywhere.
And I've got a bit of an ear for these things, but obviously I can tell that you've got a very good mic here. You sound super clear. So when I did a bit of research before you came on the podcast, I did learn that you're also the host of the Contributor podcast. So can you tell me a little bit more about that show and the kind of guests and conversations that you're having on your own podcast there?
Sure. Yeah, it's called Contributor, and it refers to the fact that there's a world of developers that work for free and they contribute to these open projects and open source projects. And I just think it's a fascinating world. Most of us are like the idea of volunteering on occasion or joining a club, but don't realize that the internet today, contrary to maybe 20 years ago, is powered almost entirely by open source. When a developer builds a new app, 90% of what they initially put into the app is all borrowed code from these volunteer groups. And then they kind of throw a little bit of their own special sauce on top to make it unique. But yeah, the nuts and bolts have all been built before by ragtag volunteers that kind of just coalesce around an idea. And I invite the creators and kind of founders of these groups on the show to hear the story. How did this project get started, and how is it now running much of what we use today?
I love that. And obviously, I think for me, your engineer background really shines there because, yes, you're in the VC world now, but it feels like this podcast is a real labour of love for you, and getting those stories out there is still really important. Is that right?
Yeah, when I was at Google, that's kind of when I got hands-on with open source, we open sourced a project. It was Google's first contribution to Apache, which is kind of a nonprofit group that shepherds many of these projects. And going through that process was just a riot. I mean, I met some awesome people. We learned about all the other Apache projects. We learned about all the other foundations. And I kind of was introduced to this world. So I started the show just because I felt like there was a lot of interesting things here that weren't being told. And I just wanted to talk to these people. And then it's kind of now has taken on a kind of a side role of as I'm investing now, I get to learn more about the industry and areas I'm interested in and could potentially make an investment in.
Absolutely love that. That really shines through there. And before Scale, like you said earlier in the podcast, you did lead an early Google Cloud and Amazon Web Service product teams. At Google, you were a product manager in the data analytics and machine learning group. But I'm curious, what were the biggest lessons that you've learned throughout your career? Because you do seem incredibly grounded. You've still remembered that engineer background and you're still giving that voice there. But what are the biggest lessons that you've picked up along the way, would you say?
I think people should focus on their strengths, in some cases more than shoring up their weaknesses. And unfortunately, we get the contrary advice typically when we go through like a performance review or feedback from managers. Managers tend to tell people they'll say, oh, you're good at so many things, but we really need to work on X, Y, Z. And they describe, people's weaknesses. And that's valuable feedback in that context, because that's probably gating your promotion or advancement in a company in that role. But what that manager's not saying is there are other people that are getting promoted just because they're off the charts good at this job or this role or this product, whatever. And I think it's worth us each thinking about what we're uniquely good at. Ultimately, an economy rewards people for differentiated excellence. That's within companies. I mean, startups need to focus on what they're uniquely good at and just hone that thing, that wedge into the economy that nobody else can compete with. And I think that lesson applies to individuals too. You can grow up as a kind of one size fits all middle management business person, and that's where you'll end up. Or you can take a shot at kind of becoming something unique and differentiated. I'd start by asking peers, people you've worked with or friends, what am I good at? What am I kind of known for? And you'll find trends. I have friends who are just kind of charismatic people, and they end up, working individual contributor desk jobs, doing engineering. And sometimes I wonder, man, these people should be in sales. Like, put them in front of some people. And the reverse is true. And we end up in these roles without stopping to think about. And maybe we spend too much time talking about following your passions, where I think actually following your strengths, what's a field you kind of happen to know better than others, and what's a skill you happen to have better than others, and just find the combination of those things and put yourself in a place to win, and then keep reassessing that over time until you keep putting yourself in a place to win.
And I think something that's a lot of business leaders find incredibly daunting at the moment is the speed of technological change is moving at a breakneck speed. But there's also the reality that it's never going to move this slow again. So what is it about the road ahead and the emerging technologies that are evolving right now that excite you? And what's your focus going to be on that next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so we think about this all the time, of course. And we've, for the last 10 or 20 years, have spent our time investing in just cloud, basically. The same stuff we built on servers, we're now offering as websites to people, what's called SaaS. But I think like a couple big trends. One of those is of course artificial intelligence, machine learning, and maybe there's two aspects to that. One is that tools are doing things for us that software is doing things for us that it never used to be able to do. and that's bringing us into markets that it never used to be in. Insurance, for example, industrial manufacturing. These weren't areas that VCs did a lot of investing in historically, but there's tons of opportunity now, and I think it's AI that's making those opportunities viable to venture scale startups today. Because there are problems there. The cloud wasn't enough to make it interesting, but if you can bring intelligence to bear, now we need to figure out a way to deploy these things in these new environments. I think open source continues to be. It was once kind of a background thing, a small group of people, and now it's not only mainstream, but it's kind of the path, I think, to building infrastructure companies. And so I think people are looking to open source as the predominant way to build software and companies in infrastructure. I mentioned there was kind of two sides to the AI. And the third bit is I think there's a confluence here between machine learning in open source. I think data scientists weren't the first people in the open source communities, but now they're finding a place. And I think that it's very exciting for me to see what elements of the machine learning pipeline are now showing up in open source.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I've loved chatting with you today. We did start the podcast talking about your origin story and what put you on this path. But before I let you go, I want to have a little bit of fun with you and ask you, what was the soundtrack to your origin story? Is there a particular song or piece of music that has inspired you, accompanied you on your career, or just helps you get your head in the zone on one of those tough days? Is there a particular song and story you can share with me? And we'll add that song to our playlist.
I wrestled in high school, played rugby and football, but wrestling was kind of my first solo sport. And my friends and I, we had a song we would warm up to before every wrestling match. And I just turned it on for my kids because I felt like they should learn all the great music in the world. And now every time we get in the car, I have a request for "Eye of the Tiger" by Survivor. And I think my wife is totally sick of it, but it's now like the kind of the family, the road trip theme song.
Love it. And I'm curious, do the kids love it still as well then?
Oh yeah. I mean they maybe I just need to introduce them to more music so they can have a broader taste. But for now, they think it's the hottest thing.
Oh man, that's the best news I've heard all day. That some music like that just doesn't age and is a hit with every generation. Man, love that. But before I let you go, for anyone wanting to find out more information about anything that you do, contact your team, etc., what's the best the best starting point, really?
Perhaps Twitter or check out the podcast on contributor.fyi.
Excellent. Well, I'll add the links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easily. So much I've loved about our conversation today. But for me, it's all about your story. That's what brings it to life, and your passion for what you're doing and the plumbing of the internet, as you called it there. It's something we don't talk about enough. So thank you so much for sharing that with me today.
Thanks.
What a great journey that Eric's been on there, but he still has that tech blood running through his veins. And I think that stuff never leaves you if you've got that passion for it. And it's just so great to hear how he hosts the Contributor podcast now, and he's still passionate about listening and learning from the stories of others. That is what it's all about. And speaking of which, I want to hear your stories, insights and experiences. There's a seat for you on this podcast. You can come on here and have a chat with me, share your story and your guilty pleasure or favourite song that has accompanied you along the way. So if you'd like to come on the podcast, or you just have a question that you'd like to leave, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter and LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But I'm afraid we've reached the end of another episode. But have no fear. I already have another episode waiting for you tomorrow. You're not getting rid of me that easily. So thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.